on such a very cold evening. I think the only positive thing about tonight, well, considering you're here, that's the most positive thing, but at least there are no mosquitoes out there. Your presence here signifies the importance you place on education and the role you play as parents and members of the school community. My name is Rita Hildahl, trustee, Ward 1, and board chair. I would like to introduce the Board of Trustees. Trustees, will you please rise as I introduce you? The Vice Chair and Trustee from Ward 1, Trustee Mark Wasilius, Christine Barr and Kathy Collins from Ward 2, Mike Babinski, Darlene Bautista, and Suzanne Hrinik from Ward 3. Unfortunately, Trustee Jackie Sneesby from Ward 1 and Trustee Anthony Ramos from Ward 2 are unable to be with us this evening. They send their regrets. Chief Superintendent Pauline Clark, where are you? There you are, thank you. So members of the senior administration and school administrators are also in attendance. At this point, I would like to acknowledge some MLAs that have honored us with their presence tonight. The Honorable James Allen, MLA from Fort Garry and Riverview. Where are you? Thank you. John Gerard from River Heights. There you are, thank you. Ted Marcelino from Tyndall Park. Welcome. And Melanie White from Burroughs. There you are. Thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Board Administrative Assistant Brenda Lapointe, as well as her able help, extremely able help, Karen Leonard, Terry Milani, and Helena Tessier for organizing this forum. Where are you? There's Brenda Lapointe, yes. Karen. Thank you. I would also like to thank TechVoc for hosting this event. Furthermore, I'd like to thank the wonderful students who are providing childcare services, and of course, the gifted culinary arts students who have provided the delicious treats. You may have noticed students in the broadcasting program from TechVoc High School filming this forum. Thank you to these creative students. This film will be available for viewing at future division events. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the consent forms sitting on your table. If you could take a look. I would ask that you please fill them out and leave it on the table for staff to pick up after the event. Should you prefer not to be captured in this video, please let Brenda Lapointe, right over there, know. Thank you. As leaders in education, our schools, and our division, we take great pride in providing quality and innovative programs and services for approximately 33,000 students and their families. The Board of Education is proud of the programs and services offered to the students in the Winnipeg School Division. We are equally proud of the staff that makes this possible. The Board of Trustees believe that the education of our children is a partnership between the home and school community. This is why it is important to create a better understanding and awareness about the educational process for our children. Tonight is about discussing the challenges we face in providing high-quality programs for students and how we must work together especially in these tough economic times. It is vital that we continue to focus on the classroom and place students as the top priority. Investing in education for our children will benefit all citizens now and for years to come. We need to protect the gains we have made in programs and services. Now, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Srini Reddy, who is a retired teacher, school principal, superintendent, and is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He has been recognized for his dedication to public education, par excellence. Mr. Reddy works tirelessly for children and youth and knows how education makes a difference in their lives. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Reddy.
Well, good evening, everybody. I can hear some echoes around the place. I wonder if the people at the back can hear clearly. Can you? Yes? No, not really. I don't know what I can do about this. I'm not used to speaking in sardine cans. But I do hope that you'll be at least able to hear part of what I'm going to say. It's just absolutely thrilling and exciting to be with you tonight. When I walked in that door, I thought to myself, what an amazing turnout. What a great evening to be here. And I'm absolutely delighted to join you this evening. I love coming out to events like this because I meet all kinds of people I haven't seen in a long time. And the great thing about it is they all look at me and say, gee, you're looking good. And that always reminds me that there are 3 stages in life. And that's childhood, adulthood, and gee, you're looking good. So I know what stage of life I'm at. Rita told you that I'm a parent, a grandparent, and a great-grandparent. My family and I are thrilled to be in that situation where we have 4 generations in our family. We never knew that we'd live to see those days, but it's wonderful. We have to thank our oldest grandson for being a father of our great-grandchild. We're expecting a 2nd great-grandchild in April, so we really are very excited. There are all kinds of grandparent stories I can tell you, but the one I really want to share with you tonight is that I had a birthday recently, and they seem to come so fast these days. But it reminded me of a story of a mother who said to her child, it's your grandpa's birthday today, you should phone him. And so she dials up, and the child picks up the phone and says, hi, Grandpa. Grandpa's excited to hear the grandchild and says, oh, hi, sweetheart, how are you? Thank you for phoning me. And the little one says, happy birthday, Grandpa. Thank you, sweetheart. Long pause, and the child says, how old are you, Grandpa? Grandpa says, I'm 74. Another long pause, and the child says, Grandpa? Yes, sweetheart. Did you start all the way from number 1? I want to commend the division on holding this meeting tonight. I think it's one of the most amazing things that you could do. I think it's wonderful for us to realize that education is the responsibility of all of us, to acknowledge that the education of our children is the responsibility of parents, families, communities, and these people are all valued partners in our efforts to provide the best possible education for all our children. I'm not a resident of Winnipeg School Division, so you may wonder what I'm doing here. Well, what I'm doing here is recognizing the work of this amazing school division that's done so much over the years. I've been very close to this division simply because I live in one part of Winnipeg, although outside the Winnipeg School Division, and I've been recognizing from not such a distance, from quite closely, the work that's being done by people in this division. And by people in this division, I mean not just the school trustees and the school administration and the people in the schools, but also the families and the communities in which our schools are located. I have the privilege of being very closely associated with many, many people in this division, and I want to say just how proud I am to see what all of you together do. but it's all of you together that do this work, not just any one group. Now, I'm more closely connected with the Winnipeg School Division because our youngest grandchildren started school in Winnipeg School Division. So I have a very direct connection. And these two little guys have been connected with a school for the past 3 years or so, and we're excited to see what it is they're doing. I also recognize that those of us who live in parts of the city, for example, where I live in the south end of the city, may or may not be fully aware of the tremendously diverse nature of Winnipeg School Division. It's amazing how you can live in one part of the school division and you may not be aware of how different things are in another part of the school division. Many of our schools in this particular school division are located in affluent areas, like where my grandkids go, but there are also schools in Winnipeg School Division that are located in some of the poorest parts of our city. For children living in those parts of the city, growing up in the city is like running a race on an uneven playing field. While I am thrilled and excited about the fact that my grandchildren go to a school where they're taken very good care of, I also know that they are very privileged children. They started out life in the fast track. They have been read to, they have been played with every day, they have been taken to all kinds of enriching activities, and it is no surprise that by the time they get to school and start in kindergarten, they are doing extremely well. In fact, they're reading fluently before they go to school. But I also think about the division's challenges when we think about other situations where the children are not that privileged, where they come from situations where, not because they're not loved by their parents, because I don't know any parents and grandparents who don't love their children and grandchildren, but simply because of the circumstances that they live in, that they don't have these opportunities that I'm talking about, and therefore sometimes are only introduced to things like literacy when they come to school. So the school division is faced with several challenges when it comes to these issues, and I can tell you that from being associated with the division for more than 20 years, I know the kinds of efforts that people in this division make to try and make sure that we level the playing field for these children. A few years ago, I was at a convocation at the University of Winnipeg, and a Nobel laureate called John C. Poliani said something that struck home with me. He said, "I was rescued from obscurity by an exceptional education." And the reason that struck closely to me right in my heart was the fact that I, too, was rescued from obscurity by a first-rate education. But that first-rate education took place in the dark days of apartheid in South Africa, where I was not considered to be a human being simply because of the color of my skin. And so, my teachers and my mother particularly told me that the only way that you are going to be able to rise out of these kinds of challenges and difficulties and meet the challenges of your future is if you really paid attention and get a good education. And remember, these were the days when it didn't matter whether people like me got an education or not. There were very few, just a handful of us who managed to graduate. But these people pointed out to us that we needed to do this. And we only managed to survive, and we only managed to become educated because there were people around us who realized that we needed to be given the support and all the help that we could get so that we can also make it in this world. That is what I see happening in the school division, and I'm always very excited. It warms my heart to see that we recognize the fact that while some of us may be privileged, there are other people in the school division to whom we should reach out and try to support them and make sure that they too are able to enjoy these kinds of excitement and opportunities that we have. So that education gave us the strength to cope with all kinds of indignities that were heaped upon us. It enabled us to resist the forces of racism and hatred, and eventually freed us from the shackles of oppression. And that is what education does. And that is why it is so important for us to make sure that every single child in our school divisions, every single family is given the opportunity to make sure that they can take advantage of this. The late Fred Rogers from, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood used to say, those of us who are in this world to educate and care for our children have a special calling, a calling that has very little to do with a collection of expensive possessions, but has a lot to do with the worth inside of hearts and minds. In fact, that's your domain, the hearts and minds of the next generation, the thoughts and feelings of the future. What a difference you make, those of you who serve our children and our families so well. We will always be grateful to you for doing that. Your role becomes even more important when we consider the rapidly changing, complex society and world in which we live and which our children are going to be growing up. I will escape all these complexities, I know, but my children will not. My grandchildren will not. They will be the ones who will have to face up to all these absolute challenging circumstances. There was a writer, Margaret Wheatley, a wonderful woman, who says to us, the challenges of this world are going to create a situation for our children of either promise or peril. And I know that because of the work that's being done in our schools, because of all the people in this community that care about our kids, our children will live in a world of promise rather than peril. I'm always appreciative of people who make special efforts to level the playing field for those children who are at great disadvantage. That is why when I moved to the city, I was so tremendously impressed when I read that Winnipeg School Division offered nursery programs in all their schools. And I looked at this and said to myself, isn't this interesting? Because we know that the province doesn't fund nursery programs. And I thought to myself, what a progressive, wonderful way of looking at things. And the reason I said that is because I have always been interested in the well-being of children right from birth or even pre-birth, not just from the time when they go to school. Because I know, and you know, that the die is very often cast in those very early years of children's lives. That we need to make absolutely certain that children are not taken care of only when they start school, because you do take care of them. But we need to make sure they're taken care of as early as possible in life, because those are the formative years. But the interesting thing for me was that this school division was doing this long before all the pundits were talking about the importance of the early years. And I said to myself, this is a wonderful thing, that a school division could start up and look at this long before people were saying you had better pay attention to those early years in the lives of children. Now, 2 days ago, you may have read a report from the Toronto Dominion Bank. You see, once upon a time, it was only those of us who were concerned about early childhood education that talked about all this. Today, it is all kinds of people in businesses and corporations and so on that are telling us that if we don't pay attention to those early years, we'll all be feeling sorry for ourselves. The TD Bank report the other day said that it's extremely important to invest in early childhood programs. They argued that this will help us to address major economic threats, to address skill shortages, and to address issues of poverty. The same Fred Rogers I mentioned earlier on said, the first 4 years of a child's life are more important in the development of a human being than the first 4 years of college. And he also said, by age 3, a young child's brain is apt to be more than twice as active as that of his or her pediatrician. So it's extremely important for us to pay attention to those young brains. The nursery program is only one example that you will be aware of the many, many services and supports that this division provides in its efforts to provide a quality education for all our children. And many of the programs provided by the division, I congratulate the board and the administration for this. I must tell you how much I appreciate this. Many of the programs that they provide are not necessarily programs that are funded programs, but they know that if we believe in equity, that if we believe in justice, if we believe that all our children are important, not just some children, then we have to invest one way or another and find the resources to make sure that we make every child, every family in our division equally valued, and that we will make sure that in spite of the challenges we face, in spite of the economic restraints, we will make sure that we find ways of addressing the needs of these children. Although I have no time to talk about all the things that I can tell you about the good programs that are going on, I do want to take a few minutes to speak about the fact that with our world changing so rapidly and becoming so much more complex, It's impossible for our schools by themselves to provide the kind of education that our children and our young people will need to cope with the challenges of the future and to become productive, contributing citizens. Schools by themselves, I've been in this game for many, many, many years. Although I'm retired for 14 years, I still know that schools by themselves cannot do the job for us in terms of raising our kids and providing for all our children and young people. Consider the fact that children spend a very limited portion of their lives in school. Sometimes people don't think about this. I've done the calculations, I've done the math on this. It's impossible for people who have the children in their care for that limited number of hours can change everything in their lives. They can do a great deal, they can contribute a great deal. But we, myself included, have to take care of those other hours that the children are outside of school and make sure that they get quality programs. All the research these days is showing one very important thing, and that is this. For our children to be successful, we need to pay attention to three components. The three components are in school, out-of-school time programs, and summer school programs. If you don't take care of all three, it's not possible for our children to get the benefits that they need. Now remember that my grandchildren and the grandchildren of many other people in this room are privileged so that in out-of-school time, the other day I went to a recital. Our 5-year-old is in a violin program. I went to a recital and just blew my mind, watching 5-year-olds being so proficient at playing the violin. So they are privileged. We can pay for this and we can send them to these programs. But what about all the other children who still need the violin and need arts programs, etc., and who can't afford to pay for them? We need to find ways of making sure that out-of-school time programs are available to all our children. And I commend this school division for doing this. I know because I'm very closely associated and have been for many years with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Winnipeg, where I volunteer a lot of my time. And I know that our association with Winnipeg schools and Winnipeg School Division is such an important thing for the children in those particular schools. I also know that many of the children who need it most have nothing good happening for them in the summer. Not because their parents don't want it for them, but because they can't afford it for them. You see, I can afford to send my grandchildren to mini university. But they don't need mini university because the mini university is at home. They can read. They get books bought for them and they play with every day and they get sent to all kinds of plays, this, that, and the other. But the children who need it most are the ones who often don't get it. And so we have things, for example, you see, if the children are sitting there for 10 weeks with nothing good happening for them because they can't afford it, then what happens is that they actually, literally fall behind in their academics. All the good work that's happened for 10 months over the school year that people have done and raised these kids' abilities, they fall back over the summer. So we need to pay attention to these kinds of things. The research is extremely clear in terms of what happens if we don't pay attention to this. In partnership with this school division, I personally, along with some other friends of mine, have been able to do something about this. We have offered summer learning programs, summer learning enrichment programs for kids, particularly in the most underprivileged parts of the school division. It's made an enormous difference. But why I'm telling you about this particular thing is this. It has been the result of a partnership with community, a partnership with the private sector, a partnership with government, and with the school division supporting it as best as the school division can with the resources it has. So putting these things together, we've been able to create an opportunity for children who otherwise would not have these opportunities to be able to do this and to think very carefully about what the results might be. I think it's important for us to realize that people like the parents are so impressed and supportive of these programs. Simply because they can't pay for it doesn't mean they don't appreciate it. In fact, they appreciate it more than we can imagine. So if we look at things like out-of-school time programs, summer programs, and so on, we need to support the division in offering these kinds of programs for us. I am absolutely grateful for the work that the schools do, and particularly I want to pay tribute to the parent advisory councils in our schools. You people that came out here tonight, I can't tell you just how much I appreciate the fact that you took the time to come out this evening, to come and support your school division, and to support your kids, because you are an important part of the education system. You are an extremely important part of the school division. And please don't sell yourself short in terms of what you think you can contribute to the education of the children in this school division. So I want to thank the people who have come out here tonight from your parent advisory councils. But I do want to say something else to you. One of the parents in the summer school, I don't want to call it summer school, the children call it CSI, Community School Investigators, and it's a summer learning enrichment program for children. We make no apology for the fact that we concentrate on learning mathematics and literacy in the mornings in fun kinds of ways. And then in the afternoons, they do all kinds of arts and music and play and visit places that they've never been to before. These types of things are important in their lives. But one of the mothers said to me last year, "My children love CSI. It's been a fantastic experience. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for providing hope for our children." You know how good that makes me feel when somebody believes that something that this school division is doing is providing hope for their children. That is what it's all about. It's about providing hope. It's about providing hope by taking the collective effort of all of us, of the people in the schools, the people in the board office, the people in the communities, our families and our friends, and saying to them, we need to put our minds and hearts together to make sure that our children are well taken care of. And I want to tell you something else. We didn't just depend on the people within the school division to do this. We appealed to the good sense and the hearts of people everywhere in the city. We said to them, this school division is challenged by having to look after so many children who are in challenging circumstances. It's the responsibility of our entire city to make sure that those children are treated justly, that we look after all our kids. And I'm happy to tell you that when we were able to explain this to people, they didn't say that's not part of our school division. They didn't say that those are not our children. They agreed with me that these are all our children. And therefore, all of us have a responsibility to do this. So what you need to do in your respective schools and your communities is to explain the same thing to people who may not have children in your schools. There are resources within your communities. There are people within your communities who can come to the table to help us in many different ways. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about skills and talents and caring that people have for children. Because one of the most important things we can do for children in order to give them a leg up is to provide them with caring mentors. People who can look after them and say to them, you know what, you're good, you can do this, and I'm going to help you do it. And so even if it's just the human factor, bringing people to come to help us within our schools. We've got all kinds of people like myself, grandparents and great-grandparents in our communities. Just because they don't have kids in the school doesn't mean that they are not responsible for helping us in the schools. They are some of the most important people we can think of. Many of them have their grandchildren far away from them. They would love to have some kids to call grandkids. We can invite these people into our schools. School divisions that invite grandparents into the schools can tell you stories about how amazing and how important this is. So please, don't just depend on what you have around in your immediate circle. Look beyond the immediate circle and try to invite people to come. I know that I'm running out of time here, Rita, and I'm going to be respectful of this. Although, you know, at this stage I can go what I want, say what I want, do what I want. Nobody can ask me to leave. There's an educator called Larry Cuban who said this. He says, the responsibility for education success rests with both teachers and students, schools and families, communities and school divisions. And so we need as many partners as we possibly can to help us do this. I was very delighted earlier this year when I read the board chair's message on the internet, and it said, together we will face many challenges, and we will work in partnership with our community, principals, administrators, teachers, and support staff to achieve positive results for all our students. And when I saw that, I said to myself, well, are you really going to do something to bring all these people together? And then I got this phone call inviting me to come to this meeting tonight. And I said to myself, now that is something that I value, that these are not just empty words, that you believe that all these people are partners and that they can come together to do good things. So I would urge you, when you go back home, to think about how you people, these very important parent advisory councils, you know, I got to tell you that Winnipeg School Division had these councils long before it was legislated in this province, because I remember some 20 or 25 years ago being invited to speak to a group of parents about this whole issue. So I said to myself, isn't this amazing that they didn't wait for this to be legislated? They had these parent councils a long time ago, which is a good thing. So I hope this is not the only time that you'll be getting together like this, but when you go back to your respective schools, ask yourselves, together with your school administrators and staff, how you can invite the rest of the community to become involved like this, that they can take the time off to come and sit down together and talk about how we can jointly take care of all our children. Let us think collectively, let us think positively about how we can strengthen these partnerships for the benefit of all our children and for their future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srini, for sharing your knowledge and experience in the education field. You confirm the importance of investing in our children and our youth, not only through programs and services, but through compassion and commitment to ensure that every child has opportunities to succeed. Now I'd like to call upon Ms. Carolyn Duhamel, who is well known as an educational leader in our community. Ms. Duhamel is a former elementary school teacher who is passionate about education. She is currently the executive director of the Manitoba School Boards Association. And in this capacity, Carolyn is aware of current issues and challenges in public education. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Rita. First of all, my thanks to the Winnipeg School Division, to the school board, for inviting me to participate in this evening. This is one of the better parts of my job, where I get to get out into school divisions, work with school boards, work with their communities, and talk to them about public education, which is my passion in life and why I do the work I do. Srini is always a challenging speaker to follow because he is so inspiring and he has so many wonderful stories, great jokes. I have to apologize, I'm not usually a very funny person, so you may find this a little bit drier, but hopefully nonetheless helpful. And I will apologize in advance for the croaking voice. I have some sinus issues, and they sometimes get in the way, but they've hidden a glass of water for me under the podium here so that I can try to keep from hacking and coughing. I think Srini has articulated very well for us how critically important our public schools are for our children, for our communities, and why we all need to be a piece of that and work with our school officials, our school boards, our government, and so on in partnership to make sure that we take care of all of our children. And certainly we would concur, and I would personally concur with all of that. Two other points before I get into talking about some of the funding issues, which is what I've been asked to address with you this evening. Public education is certainly a hugely complex piece of business in our society. It's much more complicated than it was when I went to school and probably when many of you went to school. Our communities are increasingly diverse. We are moving as a society toward a much more inclusive kind of culture. And as those things happen, the learning needs, the developmental needs of the children in our schools are much broader and much deeper than they were perhaps when you and I went to school. And so we see the range of programs and services has expanded quite dramatically in the last several decades. And we also have a mandate to provide appropriate programming for every child, whatever their need, and at whatever level they arrive in our schools. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. When I went to school, we were grouped in classes as children are now, but the instruction was this, and some kids got it and some kids didn't. And for the kids who didn't, oh well, too bad. There wasn't necessarily the kind of focus and dedication that we have now to make sure that every child, every student gets what he or she needs. Excuse me. So certainly, education is more complex. And in fact, there's a new piece of legislation that's come out just in the last couple of days on community schools, and it lists a range of things that we think perhaps community schools should or might provide. It lists health and mental health services. It lists nutrition services, early childhood education programs, before and after school programs, mentoring and other youth development programs, cultural awareness activities, parent education and development activities, crime prevention and rehabilitation services. These are not things that were there when I went to school, but they're in our schools now. And so life is incredibly more complex than it might have been several decades ago. Public schools are also big business in this province and in every other province. The collective operating budget or operating expenditures for school divisions in our province, and we have 37 school divisions, comes to just over $2 billion annually. That is the second largest expenditure in the provincial budget. And it is indeed thusly in most other provinces. In our province, we have in our public school system approximately 182,000 children, about 13,000 support employees in school divisions across the province, and in excess of 12,000 teachers. That's big business. Winnipeg School Division is the largest of our 37 school divisions. And as Rita mentioned earlier, you've got approximately 33,000 students, approximately 6,000 staff members, 77 schools, and according to your annual report, an operating budget in the current fiscal year of about $355 million. That's big business. And so for all of those reasons, the complexity, the importance of quality education, and the fact that it's big business and tax dollars, everybody needs to be involved and everybody needs to care. Public education matters to all of us. So if we think about your school division budget, the $355 million, or the collective operating budgets of school divisions across the province at $2 billion and counting, where does that money come from? And how does it get spent? Excuse me, in Manitoba, the funding of our public education system is a shared responsibility of the provincial government and local school boards. So the provincial government provides funding, and local school boards have taxing authority to raise money for education purposes. For any of you who like figures and reading, you can find a report like this. It's called the Frame Report. It's published annually. It's on the Manitoba Education website, and it details both the revenues and the expenditures in all areas for all school divisions in the province. And if you want numbers to make you dizzy, there are lots there. But certainly, I think it demonstrates the complexity of the system that we have and what it costs to fund that system. We have a funding formula in this province and a funding program from the provincial government that is extremely complex because it has a number of different categories and different kinds of grants and different criteria for those grants. The funding program is as complex as the education that we offer in our schools for our children. Overall in our province, approximately 2/3 of the operating funding for school divisions comes from the province, and the other third comes from property taxation levied by local school divisions. The provincial funding, the amount that any school division will get from the province in any given year, can vary quite dramatically, and it depends on a number of things. The characteristics of your student population, your geographic location. If you're remote, isolated, then there is compensation for that, and certainly the relative wealth of your local tax base. So if you're in a school division that has very low assessment and very limited capacity to raise local tax dollars, then you get more funding from the provincial government to try to compensate for some of that. Winnipeg School Division runs very close to the provincial average in terms of the breakdown between your provincial dollars and your local dollars. You're at approximately 64% of your operating funding coming from provincial sources, and about 34% coming from your local school division tax levy. That local tax levy, as Strini pointed out earlier, permits you to do a whole lot of things. It certainly permits you to top up, if you will, and to enhance the mandatory, the mandated kinds of programs and services that the provincial government says you must offer to your students. But it also, and perhaps more importantly, allows you as a school division to afford programs that are not required by the province, but are deemed important and useful and priorities for the community. And so Strini mentioned your nursery school program. You have a division-wide nutrition program. You have probably amongst our Manitoba school divisions the most extensive array and range of special needs supports and programs in the province. So those are things that your local tax levy allows you to do. So if this model of shared funding is what we have in our province, then what does that look like in other provinces? There was a time in Canada where most school boards in most provinces had local taxing authority. The reality right now is that Manitoba is the only province where school divisions have taxing authority. School boards in every other province have lost their ability to tax locally, and all of their funding comes from the provincial treasury. There are certainly folks in our province who think that would be a good idea for Manitoba. As a school boards association, we don't agree. Education. In fact, it is in most of the larger provinces. The difference is that it is the province in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan, in Ontario, in Alberta, in British Columbia. It is the province that levies the property tax and then distributes the dollars to school divisions. We do have some of our Atlantic provinces where there is no longer any property tax component to fund public education, but they are the exception rather than the rule. So when you hear folks say, well, school board shouldn't tax because then we wouldn't have to have property tax for public education, that's not correct, and it is not the situation in other provinces. So, first of all, if school boards lose taxing authority, it doesn't mean you don't use property tax to fund education. Yes, you do, just a different person or a different body that levies the tax. But more importantly, what we've seen in the provinces that are fully funded from the provincial treasury, a number of really disturbing trends from our perspective. In those provinces that have a full provincial funding model, we have seen the level of support for public schools as a percentage of provincial expenditures has been steadily declining over the years. So, and it's certainly not keeping pace with what it actually costs to run the system. So the level of support is declining. School boards in provinces with full provincial funding models have lost considerable flexibility in terms of how they use those dollars. Many of you are familiar with the adage that he who pays the piper plays the tune. Well, certainly in the provinces with full provincial funding models, provincial governments have become increasingly prescriptive about how you can spend your dollars, where you can spend your dollars, and how many dollars you can spend in any given area. So it doesn't allow school boards the flexibility to respond to local needs and priorities to the extent that we can here in Manitoba. What we have seen, and this has been really alarming in the last couple of years, where provincial governments are in financial crisis, we have seen some fairly dramatic reductions to school division funding, and many of those reductions have been sort of 11th hour announcements. School boards have had very short notice in which to make some pretty dramatic cuts to their operating budgets. Given that about 67 to 70% of a school board's budget is for teachers in classrooms, if you have to cut big dollars, that's what's going to go, okay? So teachers, programs, services for students. In some of the provinces that have full provincial funding models, they have had a number of blue ribbon commissions, if you will, or study groups to look at the situation. And what those study groups have reported is a chronic underfunding of public schools relative to the mandates and the expectations that are laid upon them by provincial governments. So the expectation for programs and services is here, and the funding's down here. So there's a mismatch between what we expect schools to do and the funding that is available to them to be able to do those things. We've seen some pretty dramatic infrastructure deficits in some of those provinces. In this province, the Public Schools Finance Board pays for the construction of new schools and major renovations to existing schools. But there are a lot of infrastructure things that happen in school divisions that your local tax dollar pays for. Because if you have to wait in line for the Public Schools Finance Board, you could wait a very long time, or they may not approve whatever infrastructure improvement you want to make. So that's another piece. British Columbia has seen in the last decade and a half about 200 school closures, where school boards are trying to balance their operating budgets by reducing the number of facilities, reducing the number of schools they have open. In Alberta, we have seen the loss of school days in order to shrink the operating budget. And we have also seen an increased reliance in several provinces on parent fundraising efforts for equipment, supplies. In Alberta a few years back, I was quite alarmed to learn that in my grandson's school, they were fundraising for bus transportation because the money wasn't there. Alberta at one point canceled kindergarten because the money wasn't there. So I think we have to be mindful when we say it would be nice for all the money to come from the province so we don't have to use property tax to fund education. It's not necessarily a rosy picture in every province, and so we have to be careful of that. In Manitoba, we have a lot of funding challenges, just like they do in other provinces. The difference is school divisions have a little more latitude in terms of accessing resources to address those funding challenges. Certainly, every year, our costs rise. It's like your household budget. You know, food costs more each year, gasoline costs more, except for maybe the last week where the prices dropped. But it'll go up again, I'm sure. Taxes cost more, heating bills cost more. School divisions experience the same thing. Their costs rise year over year over year. There are always new and emerging needs. Some of those are because you might have additional students come in, or students with different learning needs come in and you need to do different things. You may need to upgrade your technology. You may have provincial policy initiatives and directions like the class size reduction strategy that is ongoing, that yes, the province will fund to a point, but probably not entirely, and so your local funding tops up where provincial monies don't cover the full cost. There are also competing priorities. As our school divisions become more diverse, as our student populations become more diverse, there's lots of competition for scarce resources. So one group may feel that this is a priority, another group feels this is a priority, another group wants this, another school needs that, and so there's always that competition for very scarce resources. And certainly through my years as a school trustee in St. Boniface, I attended a lot of budget meetings, and I never once heard a community member or a parent group or even an educator in the system stand up and say to us, please take this program away, please reduce this service, please give us less than this. Quite the contrary. It was, we want everything we have, and then besides we need this, 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 and this. So the list gets longer every year, and it becomes a very challenging balancing act for a school board in terms of how to balance those priorities and meet all the needs. And I have to say that I suspect it's true for your trustees here in Winnipeg. As a school trustee, I did not take great pleasure in raising property taxes. And in fact, we got beaten up pretty badly sometimes for it. But it was either that or take some things off the list. So those are the challenges we have. A couple of others that are significant in our province. We do have some reluctant contributors. We do have people who say, I don't have kids in school, my kids finished long ago, I shouldn't have to pay for this. So, you know, my property shouldn't be taxed. And so looking for exceptions. And we do have, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, we do have a coalition in this province that is very determined to see education property tax eliminated, to see school board taxing authority taken away, and education property taxation eliminated in its entirety. That group is led largely by business leaders, the Manitoba and Winnipeg Chambers of Commerce, the Keystone Ag producers, some seniors groups, cottage owners, real estate associations. These are folks who have said clearly, and they have campaigned quite aggressively in recent years for the removal of taxing authority from school divisions, from school boards, and the elimination of property tax entirely to fund education. The challenge with that position, quite apart from the fact that it removes flexibility and the latitude for school divisions, school boards at the local level to respond to their communities, is the magnitude of the challenge. When you combine school tax levies and the provincial education support levy, that comes to a total of $915 million annually. And those who would remove property taxation as a source of funding for public education have yet to come up with an alternative as to where we will find $915 million. So it's easy to say that we should do this, much harder to come up with a solution that will actually achieve that. So if we consider what's going on in other provinces, the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, if we look at some of our funding challenges here in Manitoba, and if we think about all the things Strini said in terms of what so many of our children need and what all of our children need, the challenge becomes then how do we collectively ensure that we have adequate resources for our public schools in this province. Some of that is money, some of it is people, some of it is time, some of it is effort. But how do we put that together, and how do we work together to ensure that all of our kids get what they need? Parents can be incredibly strong advocates in this process. Your school board can advocate for you, but you have a significant role as parents, and you have some real power and clout as parents. For one thing, you know your kids, and you have a pretty good sense, and you know what they need for their learning and to be successful in school. As parents involved with the school system on a regular basis, you also have probably a much greater and deeper understanding of some of the realities and challenges that are present in our schools on a day-to-day basis. You may be only 30% of the taxpayers out there who are paying the freight for our public education system. But because you know it perhaps better than many others, you are in a key position to influence and shape public opinion about what is important here. Okay? So you have some knowledge that can be useful. You certainly have connections in the community, and Strini alluded to that. You know business people. You know community leaders. You know seniors. You know real estate folks. You know ag producers perhaps, or people in the agricultural industry. You know a whole lot of folks in your community, and you have connections, and you have voice. When parents speak up collectively, people listen. And so all of those things together put you in an ideal position to be very strong advocates for your public schools, both in your own school divisions and across the province. As the little brochure on your table says, public schools matter to everyone. They matter to us all for a whole lot of reasons, and it is our collective responsibility to ensure that all of our schools have what they need to educate all of our children well. We need to work together as government, as school boards, as parents, as business leaders, as community leaders, as industry people. We all need to work together, and so that is the challenge for us all, is to sit down and figure out how do we do this collectively to make sure that all our kids have what we need. I think you as parent groups can play a major role in that, and certainly I think your school board and we as a school board association look to parents as critical allies in that fight to make sure all our kids get what they need in our public schools. Thank you.
Trustee Barr brought to my attention that there was a graph earlier that talked about 4% of the budget is collected from property taxation. I want to make it very clear that it is 34% of the budget that's collected from property taxation in the school division. Thank you, Christine, for pointing that out. And also thank you, Carolyn. I've had the pleasure of working with Carolyn on many issues facing education. The challenges and obstacles in planning for student success are many. Carolyn works hard in assisting trustees across Manitoba to address these concerns, and it's always a pleasure to work with this strong and knowledgeable advocate of public education. Thank you. Now, on your table is a handout outlining 3 questions to facilitate our discussion. A, based on the presentations, what issues concern you the most? And B, what role can parents and school communities play to help ensure that the necessary revenues from provincial funding and property taxation are available to fund student programs and services? And C, what additional information or resources or processes do you feel would be helpful to continue this dialogue with our parents, our neighbors, communities, and our partners in education? Your voice is valuable and will provide a solid foundation to continue our dialogue with residents, our community, our neighbors, and the provincial government. Please select a person to write down your group's ideas or suggestions or comments. At approximately 10 after 8, Ms. Duhamel will facilitate the discussion. I would ask that you choose a person at your table to highlight some points of your discussion to report back to this assembly. Your feedback is important to trustees and our guests, and we want to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Could we have your attention, please? We need to do this. This means it's time to listen. It's working. That's an old teacher habit. If you want people to listen, stop talking and listen, you put your arm up. Okay, I know that you haven't had a lot of time to discuss these questions, but the school division, the school board is anxious to hear some of what you have to say this evening before people start exiting the building on us. And so what we're going to do is just take a few answers to those questions that you've responded to, and then invite you, before you leave this evening, to leave your sheets with the written comments on the tables. They will be picked up. The school division will compile all of your responses and send a report back to you, so you will know what was said by everybody who's here this evening. And if you haven't had enough time to consider all the questions, I'm told you can take the sheet home and get your responses back to the division as soon as possible. So before everybody exits tonight, let's just take a sample of responses from around the room. The first question, based on the presentations you heard, what are your particular concerns? Now, we do have a couple of people with microphones, and they will dash to wherever you are so we can hear your responses. Are there a couple of tables who want to perhaps offer a perspective here? There's somebody way back here.
Thank you. I think one of the main points that came out of as far as concerns in response to the presentations was in regards to parent involvement. Those of us that are here are either in administration, or the bulk of us are on the parent councils. And I think the biggest challenge for myself, for example, being a parent with my oldest daughter in kindergarten, this is obviously a new process for us, and coming into a parent council and seeing the history of only a few, a minority of parents from the school representing at the council, brainstorming on ways on getting people either to that meeting or finding ways that meets them where they're at, whether they're able to come to a parent council meeting or not, and finding ways that people can get involved at various levels, and creating a measure of awareness for them on these types of issues that are the macro issues that you've given us some insight on, but connecting it to them in their day-to-day, wiping faces and putting kids in jackets and just dealing with the day-to-day life on the ground, connecting on the ground with the macro statistics that are up on the board. So, but it's at the point of getting parents involved.
Okay, thank you. Good point. I think there was somebody up here who wanted to respond to the question as well. Oh, here comes somebody with a microphone for you.
Lack of funding after-school program, community programs. There's a lot of lack of funding. These kids can't get out there and get involved in after-school activities because there's no money for the activities to be there. These kids are playing on the street in North End. they have nowhere to go. So we need more funding. Also, community issues to support families and students. There's a lot of concern for that. A lot of families and a lot of our students in our area, where we are in the North End, some of these kids don't have food, they don't have clothing to come to school, so they're not going to be in school. So we need to direct and support these families.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. A last comment on that first question. There's somebody here, right here, the green sheet, the lady who's waving her arm in the air. Thank you.
Sorry. We've got more educational assistants in classrooms as well as more clinician time in the schools. I know that my daughter's class only has a EA in the mornings or afternoons, and you've got class sizes that are 25 kids with one teacher. You've got 6 kids who need help, and it's a little bit difficult, as well as the clinician time for kids who are behind in reading or whatever it may be. Only get to see the reading clinician once a week.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's, sorry. Okay.
Our table suggested that based on the presentations, that concerned them the most would be local decision-making for local needs. Could be taken away if property taxation is jeopardized or if things get out of hand, if there's no money left over.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, let's try the second question. What role can parents and school communities play to help ensure that we have the necessary revenues we need to fund the programs and services that our students require? Any thoughts about this question? Oh, here's somebody way over here. Thank you.
Heather Grant-Jury from Stanley Knowles, and our table talked about changing the way we do things. We're in a technology-driven world right now, so the old days of coming to that standard parent council meeting at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night and we get all upset if there's only 4 people there, I think we have to think outside of the box. I think there's much more we can do with Facebook pages, with texting, with BBMing, with all of that. We talked at our table about why aren't folks sort of showing up at a budget meeting, or what role can parents play at a parent council? Well, whether you've got 5 people there, 12 people, or 40 people, we need to, as parent councils, do a better job in educating about what the budget's about. It is, as you said, so incredibly complex. It's way over people's heads. We're in a fast-paced world right now. People can't even understand their own family budget, let alone school board budgets. It's a 2-income family. Personal debt is going higher. All of those things in light, and then we're saying to them, help us understand $1 million or $1 billion budget. Not going to happen until it gets to a point where there's a program or a service that is cut. I think we need to simplify it. I think we need to educate a lot better. I think we need to use technology in a better way and much more effectively than we're doing now. And I think we need to use that to as a stepping stone to the MLAs, to the process, to the provincial government. If we blast it out to all our parents, here's an email. It's a standard form. Sign your name, date it, push a button on your computer, send it off to your MLA. That has much more legs than saying, come to a meeting Wednesday night at 7 and we're all upset because there's not 50 people there. We'd be surprised how many people can just push that button, off it goes. That's the political pressure we need to the next level of government. So thinking outside the box, don't get down on ourselves all the time. I think a lot of times we're doing some incredible work out there. We get caught up in a numbers game that, oh, we didn't have this, and all we are is fundraising machines. I think we need to take credit for what we've done, and it is an incredible amount of work. Pat ourselves on the back and just know that we just got a little bit more to do.
Okay, thank you. Is there another table that wants to take a run at the second question? We've got 2 tables here. Let's have those responses very quickly.
Hi, my name is Ruth. I'm a parent council member at General Wolf. I'm also a parent of 4 kids, which 3 of them are adults and 1 still in high school. I truly believe in being an active voice, and as our responsibility as parents, grandparents, and prior being students as well, I believe we need to educate our communities. We need to educate the parents and encourage involvement. Through social media, like we've heard before, a lot of the children use Facebook. Why not us as well? Contacting levels of government and place our concerns. Just sitting here and listening, sometimes that just doesn't pass the word around. It's our voice being heard outside from the walls. Educating big companies, businesses, sections, that these students will be the future in their company one day. Also, the success of the schools comes, and our students' success depends on the support of the businesses, government levels, and communities, and outside elders, parents, grandparents. We talk about other third world countries that are fighting for education, and we take our education for granted. I come from a country that sorry, the microphone went there. Our students are considered terrorists for protesting for their education and their right to survive as students and have equal amount of education just as a rich community have. So education is our fight toward forgetting ignorance is being shut down. Education is our key.
Thank you. Okay, there was one lady here as well.
Hi, my name is Maggie from Greenway School Parent Council. We basically said very similar things to what you were saying, but we're talking about maybe getting community members advocating against this coalition, which we feel is a really important issue that a lot of us didn't know existed. We don't want the taxation taken away because our schools and our students need it, and we need for parents and community members to understand how important it is. So we want to involve the community so that they know that our students are going to grow up to be their doctors and their lawyers and their caretakers. So those that don't have children, it's other people's children who are going to be doing that. And if we don't continue to pay for their education, we're not going to have those when we grow up. So it's important for people to understand why we need to keep this taxation in place, why our students need this so much, why these community resources that we're offering our students are so important, and that those are the things that are going to be cut if we take away that taxation.
Thank you. Could we have a couple of quick responses to the final question, because I know that people are getting anxious and some of you have things you have to get home to. Yes, over here. Have we got a microphone? There we go. So what information or resources do you need to continue the dialogue?
Parent counselor from Sisler High School. One of the biggest things that happens to us parents...
Can you speak right into the mic?
Sorry. One of the biggest things that happens to parents of high school students is the burnout from the elementary schools. But we need to have a strong, loud voice and fight for things to say as they are. So we need someone to hear us. If it means campaigning to keep things the way they are and setting something in motion, then it's time we do it. And the parents have to be the voice to stand behind the schools.
Okay, thank you. One final comment over here.
Hi there, I'm Tia Everett from Ecole Robert H. Smith School. One of the things that came up over at our table was making sure that everyone in the community, and especially the parent population base, really understands how important the funds that we get from taxation really are, and how exceptionally special this is in Manitoba that we continue to have it. I moved here from BC 2 years ago. The situation in BC is just absolutely dire. My hometown had 8 schools closed down in the past 5 years. 2 are remaining. You can't let that happen here. And we need to make sure that everybody in our community, and again in the parent base at large, knows that this is great and that we need to reach out to them and give them the tools to equip them so that they can go out there and share this information. So having access to demographics and charts like this in easy to understand language would really make a big impact for us to go back out there, talk to people on the playground, talk to people on the street, and really get people involved in Spark, because this is something that could be taken away from us very, very easily, and when it does, you're not going to get it back.
Thank you. I will repeat then, please make sure that when you leave this evening, if you've answered the questions, you leave your sheets on the table so they can be collected and the information collated. It will be sent back to you. If you didn't get a chance to answer the questions, take those sheets home, think about the questions, and get your answers back to the division. And thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, everyone, a heads up. Budget season for the Winnipeg School Division will start in late January, and we hope that all schools, parent councils, student councils, advisory committees, and employee groups will be participating in these discussions. Now I'd like to call Vice Chair Mark Wasilius to give some closing remarks. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I hope everybody found this evening as eye-opening and informative as we hoped you would. Trustee Barr, always the practical one on the board, had pointed out that in our great wisdom and organizational skills, we forgot to put a place for emails on the contact sheet. And we don't want this to be the last meeting. We want it to be the first. We want you to go back to your home communities and take what you've learned here and bring it to them and keep the discussion going. And then we want you to go to your neighbors, to your family, your friends, and get as many people interested in understanding how important and how crucial these issues are. And for that to continue, we certainly would like to get more information out to you. And if you would like to leave your email address, we don't sell anything here, thankfully. There's a contact list, and we'd ask that if you could indulge us and do that. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank each of you for participating this evening. I'd also like to thank our guest speakers, Mr. Reddy and Ms. Duhamel, for their participation and their willingness to share their experiences and insight. Tonight, we discussed the importance of continuing to provide the high-quality education for our children. As parents, grandparents, and caregivers and educators, we are committed to having programs and services that will foster our children's development and enable them to achieve academic success and become constructive members of an ever-changing and demanding society. That's loud. No, sorry. All right. We've heard from Srini and Carolyn about the positive impact of education and the consequences in, in other provinces when the sources of funding for students and school have become restricted. It is clear, I think, to most people in this room that we have to work together as parents, as staff, as elected officials to ensure that the necessary supports are in place to continue to provide high-quality education programs and services. We've also heard that while provincial funding may be limited for several years to come, it's fair to say that we don't want our children's education to pay that price. What's also been very clear in these discussions this evening is the need to continue the dialogue, and not just here, not just at our schools, but with our neighbors. We have to get people to understand that when you invest in schools, you invest in your country, in your province, and in your city. Your voice has been extremely valuable and will provide a solid foundation to continue our dialogue. I'd ask that you leave the consent forms along with your notes on the discussions, as they will be collected. They're going to be summarized tonight, and they will be provided to everyone in attendance at a later date. And again, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I'd like to thank you for your participation and comments, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue in the future. Thank you very much.